Hey, what's up guys? We are starting a new series today, and the title of the series is called The You Effect. I'm really excited to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about influence and the influence that we have in people in our lives. But before that, got some announcements for you. Number one, as you can tell, we are switching it up. We are in the cafe area. I am wearing basketball shorts, which is very me. Lily told me to not wear a hat on Sundays, but I will continue to wear my hat until we're meeting in person because I'm a rebel. But anyway, here's some announcements for you guys. First things first, we are going to be taking a week-long break from our 10 a.m. Proverbs call. We if you're watching this, it should be Saturday or Sunday when you're watching this. So this last Friday, we finished the book of Proverbs. Man, I'm so excited that we were able to do that together. So I'm gonna give you guys a break. You can sleep in past 10 a.m. now. And then we're gonna go ahead and start looking into the next book that we're gonna do. Right now, I think the thought is to be doing either the book of Acts or the book of Romans. So if you have an opinion on which book you'd like to read through, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. Which book do you think we should do next? That being said, let's go ahead and hop in today. So today, to start, I want you to think about your group of friends. Think about your group of friends at school, or even here at youth group, or maybe you have different friends from different schools. Just think about the group that you usually run with. And now think of one of those people that's like the leader of that group, or the person that you usually follow. Do you have somebody in mind? All right, hold on to that. So when I was, back in my day, when I was in high school, there was this guy in my youth group, and his name was Kyle. And Kyle was one of the coolest kids I'd ever met. He had long curly hair, he rode BMX and he was really good at that. He was very outspoken and very popular, and everybody wanted to be around Kyle. And he had an awesome sense of humor. He played on the worship band. So needless to say, he was a very well-rounded guy, and everybody just wanted to be a part of his life. It got so much to the point where, like, whenever we would have events, I would call my youth pastor and I would ask him, or I would text Kyle and make sure that Kyle was going to be there, because I knew that if Kyle was there, it was going to be an awesome time. Now, the best part about this is that Kyle didn't really know that he was that popular. He was just being him. And that's just who he was. He was a person that attracted other people, and he always made new people feel welcome. He just wanted people to have fun and enjoy being around him. And he had no idea that he was influencing people. He was just genuinely a good dude. And you may have a current friend or an old friend that's like that, and that they might have had a huge effect on the people around them, or even you. You know, someone that is so fun that people always want to be with, or that is so nice that they make you want to be as nice as possible, or someone that works hard so his or her teammates try harder. But then there's the opposite, right? So there's people that maybe are mean, so when you're around them, you're always on edge. Or maybe they're always in a mood, so they bring everybody down around them. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, the truth is that most of us have an effect on those around us, even though you don't really think about it. They either think that they have no effect on others, or they haven't thought through how they can use that positive influence. So this is what makes this series tricky, because we're going to be talking about the you effect, the power that you have to affect those people around you and situations around you. In other words, we're going to be talking about your influence. For some of you, your influence is obvious. You may be the popular person, you may be the captain of the football team or your club, you may be the person that people constantly want to be around, or the person that your friends are always texting and are kind of leaning on you to make the plans. That's awesome. Now, there may be some of you though that possibly don't fall into that category, and you feel like you have no influence. You feel like you just kind of fade into the background, and maybe the only influence you hold is on the family pet, and even that dog or cat or whatever it is ignores you sometimes. But both extremes are totally normal, and the truth is that no matter where you land, you are probably more of an influencer than you think. You may not realize how much of an effect you actually have on other people. So let's look back at someone who influenced lots of people and who was around Jesus. What we're reading today comes from the book of John. And if you don't know who John was one of Jesus's closest followers and students. John was so close to Jesus that when Jesus was on the cross and he was dying, he looked at John and asked John to take care of his mom, Mary, when Jesus would go on to die. So we can trust that the book of John comes from somebody who, one, was an eyewitness, and two, was somebody that was extremely close to Jesus. So let's set the scene real quick. In 3 years of ministry, Jesus was always followed by crowds. And it could have been because they needed healing, or because they just liked following Jesus around. But for whatever reason, Jesus had a lot of influence and people were always following him. So now that the scene is set, let's read John 6 verses 1 through 6. It says this: "Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up to a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for those people to eat?' He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do." So take this scene here for a moment. You know, you get to where you're trying to go to, and you see this massive crowd of people heading your way. And immediately Jesus turns to Philip and he asks Philip, "Well, what are we going to do to feed all these people?" Now, if I was Philip, I would have some questions for Jesus. I'd be like, excuse me, like, aren't you the one that's supposed to know that? Aren't you the one that has all the answers? Aren't you the Son of God who can do all these crazy things? You're the miracle guy, so this is your job. But Philip instead says this. He says, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." John 6:7. In other words, homeboy's saying that somebody in this crowd better be crazy rich, and he better have all this money, because they're going to need a ton of money to be able to feed all these people. Imagine if I sent you and I expected you to go to Taco Bell and get 5,000 beefy 5-layer burritos for everybody and a Baja Blast with easy ice, because that's the only way to drink it. You would freak out. That's kind of the position that they are in. They have 5,000 people coming towards them, and they need to find a way to feed them all. So the story continues with John 6:8-9. He says, "Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. 'Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?'" So apparently, one mom in this entire village thinks it prudent to pack a lunch for her son, unlike all the other moms who apparently set everybody out without any food. And not only that, but then you have Andrew, who's ratting this little boy out and telling everybody that he's got food. So they bring this food to Jesus to do something with. I don't know about you guys, but if I was that little boy, I'd be kind of mad about this, but that's beside the point. Here's where Jesus gets to work. It says in John 6:10-14, Jesus said, "Have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in their place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, 'Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted.' So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign of Jesus performed, they began to say, 'Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world.'" Now, I have a couple questions every time I read this story. Number one, where did they get the baskets from? Number two, how did the whole feeding thing go? Did Jesus just break a loaf and then the tip of that loaf just appeared again? So that means everybody was getting the end of the bread, which everybody knows is the worst part. And then what happened with the fish? Was he cutting it up and then the fish was just replenishing itself? Was he just doing it behind a tent or something? Tons of questions whenever I read this story, but that's not what we're going to focus on. Here is the real gold nugget of the story that I want us to take a look at and I want us to park on. Who had the biggest influence in this passage? Now, you can say Jesus, and that'd be a good answer. He's the Son of God. He just performed a miracle. People are calling him a prophet, so he changed everybody's outlook on him. You could also say the disciples, right? They were there. They were learning from Jesus. They were providing food for all these people. One of them is actually the one that found the food. So you could say that the disciples had the most influence. But then there's one more unlikely superstar in the story that I want us to look at, and that is the little boy. Now hear me out. It would seem opposite. Like how can a kid that barely had any food to eat himself be influential? The truth, though, is that it wasn't the amount of food he had that made him influential, but it was what he was willing to do with it that made him influential. Now, this is even bigger if you look at context. Y'all know I love looking at the context of scriptures. Back in Jesus' day, children weren't really valued. Children were just kind of part of the scenery. They weren't really a big part. This was a very older male-centric culture, so children really didn't have much value. No one would think that this child would have the influence, but that didn't stop him from stepping up, and his willingness would go to impact thousands of people. Think of the story this kid was going to tell his mom when he got home. Mom, there were so many people there and everybody was hungry, and he used my lunch to feed everybody. And now here we are reading about this boy's story thousands of years later. I bet you this kid had no idea that this was going to be part of the story. It didn't matter that he didn't take center stage, that he wasn't well known or in leadership, he wasn't a speaker or a pastor, that he wasn't athletic or super smart, that he wasn't cool enough or interesting enough. Jesus didn't give a rat's boot about where the kid came from or what his background was. The only thing that mattered was that he was there and that he brought everything that he had, and that was enough. Because ultimately, this is about the power of Jesus and what he can do when someone is willing to be used and someone offers what they do have. So when it comes to affecting the world around you, it's all about showing up and offering what you do have. Before that, you got to recognize this though. You have more of an effect than you think you do on people around you. Imagine if the little boy in the story believed that he had no effect in this situation. You know, why would he even be in the story? Would people find food another way? Would the party just end a little bit early and send everybody home for dinner afterwards? Regardless of if you feel like you have nothing, you can still show up with what you do have. We need to make a mental switch on how we see influence. It's time we realize that having influence and impacting is really just being willing to use what God already gave you. It doesn't matter how big or small you think it is. So in other words, having an impact isn't about doing more or having more or knowing more people. It's about offering what you already have, getting out of the way, and letting God do what he does. Choosing to believe, even when it's unbelievable, that you have an effect on your friend group, that you have an effect on your section of the band, that you have an effect on your teammates, that you have an effect on your siblings, that you have an effect on your classmates, on your youth group. Then imagine what God would do with that you effect that you have. Even if it seems impossible or if it seems like you don't have a lot of pull, just look at what Jesus did with this little boy's lunch. And think about it. Here are some steps for you guys to think on. Identify the who. Who are the immediate people around you that you have the potential to influence? Who are the closest ones to you? Then identify the need. What is it that people around you need? Seriously, take a look. What do they need? Do they need encouragement? Do they need time? Do they need someone to listen? Do they need someone to help them with schoolwork or chores? And then identify what you can do to help them out and actually do it. Follow through with that. Now, let me flip this view as we start wrapping up. Take a second and think of somebody that influenced you or somebody that helped you get to where you're at. What was it about them that affected you in such a positive way and led you to become the person who you are now? In that same way, you have that power to influence others. And that's actually why we do things like small groups, by the way, which if you're not in a small group, man, you gotta be in one. Reach out to us, send us a DM, and we'll make sure we get you plugged into a small group. Because the people that you are around affect you and you affect them more than you may even realize. The question to ask yourself is not, do I have the ability to impact people? The question is actually, how am I going to use what I do have to impact people? Guys, ultimately, God has the power to change people. So all that we need to do is show up, be available, give whatever we do have, and then, like I said, get out of the way and let God work. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.